Welcome to Millennials Meet Liberty, your source for searing hot libertarian takes on the world's weekly headlines. Here's your host, Colt Thompson.
Good afternoon, you sandbagging sons of bitches. Welcome to episode number 25 of Millennials Meet Liberty with yours truly, Colt Thompson. Got a spicy deluxe one for y'all today. Not too much on the docket. Just going to recap the news of the past week through my libertarian lens and vantage point per the usual. Really amped up as we have racked up some more followers this past week. So the marketing pitch has paid off dividends and people are really consuming this stuff and telling me they really enjoy it. So this is what I got for you guys today. I'm going to speak about three things. I'm going to talk about Kobe Bryant, Bernie Sanders, and automation. So I'm going to talk about three things today. You guys know I'm a little bit of a sports person on the side, so I want to devote some time to speak about Kobe and his abrupt, awful, tragic passing just 3 or 4 days ago. And then I will pivot and talk about what this podcast is truly devoted to, which is the markets, economy, politics, culture, everything around what's going on here on the home front. So getting into this, I just wanted to reflect on Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant to us millennials. I'm speaking to you guys as a 28-and-a-half-year-old. Kobe Bryant was essentially our MJ. He was our Michael Jordan. Strip out LeBron James and Michael Jordan, and Kobe Bryant is left as the best basketball player of all time. He's literally in the three-hole, make no mistake about it. And there are some people who argue that he is actually the best basketball player who's ever graced the earth. Certainly he is in the top three, and certainly his prowess in terms of championships, scoring titles, all-star ballots, all of those things really round him out to be one of the GOATs. But what I wanted to talk about was how awful everything was, and just, mention how much he meant to my family as we were a basketball family growing up, and how many people wanted to emulate him and his really decisive strike-like mentality out of the basketball court, hence why he had the nickname Black Mamba, how he was so dedicated, such a cerebral player, such a student of the game, somebody who was cutthroat by nature, would look you in the eye and just be a real straight shooter. He always had these interviews, and he always had a lot of things going on in his life that maybe were kind of out of left field, but he handled with grace and class and became a better person. And I think that he was truly someone who people could look up to, whether it was just him on the court or his charitable work and generosity outside of basketball. I think he truly was a good person at heart, despite, people saying a few negative things about him. By and large, he was someone who was omnipresent, who was just above, mere men. He was one of these guys who everyone was perceived as immortal. So it was that much of a crushing, devastating situation when the helicopter carrying his daughter and 7 or 8 others plummeted into the earth, ending all of their lives. So the entire thing was just a tragedy. But waking up as a kid, I think I saw Kobe Bryant more than any other athlete on SportsCenter at 6 a.m. Stuart Scott, RIP to him, Alex Van Pelt, Steve Levy, all of these guys just covering Kobe and his every move on the basketball court and off the basketball court. And it was just an unbelievable moment the past few days, just seeing Twitter and the likes of social media remember someone who's truly a giant and a legend, and someone people could look up to through his focus, determination, commitment to bettering himself, not just in basketball, but as a person as a whole. So a lot of childhood memories were smashed, and I feel like the stuff was taken from me. Definitely hit me hard. I didn't even want to look at social media or the TV because it was incessantly on there, the coverage of him, his daughter, and the other aforementioned people's deaths. So I wanted to take some time quickly to commemorate him and his passion for life and basketball and his craft and trade. And, condolences to his wife and his 3 remaining children, and then all of the people who were close to him who were not necessarily blood, namely Shaquille O'Neal and others who got to know Kobe really, really well. And, of course, Shaquille O'Neal is going to give an incredible eulogy. I'm sure it'll be one of the best of all time. And he's already doing charitable work in, memory of Kobe. And it's interesting because they were kind of adversarial at one point, and the media tried to pit them against each other and eventually came around to being lifelong friends. So, of course, this is, all the more tragic considering Kobe had, you would think by normal people's standards, another 30, 40, 50 years to go. So he was just heating up in his personal life and professional life outside of basketball, all the charitable work and giving back to the community he was participating in. It's just a really big shame. So shout out Kobe, one of the GOATs. I'm going to call him the GOAT on this podcast because he meant that much to me in my upbringing. And now I'm going to shift gears a little bit to talk about politics and the economy, a scotch, just because that's the name of the game in this podcast. So like I said, I wanted to talk about politics and the market and the economy and everything going on there, but how could I not stop but mention what's going on in the wild, wacky world of Bernie Sanders and the Democratic presidential race for the nomination to be the Democratic candidate taking on Donald Trump in here 2020. So interestingly enough, I think the underbelly of America, especially to the left of center, the Democrats with a capital D, are becoming more increasingly socialist, Marxist, and or communist by nature. So they're really looking towards the government for the answers and solutions for problems that the government always creates. So it's one of these things where you throw the mentally handicapped or physically handicapped child into the lake, he starts to drown. You save him, and then you say, look at me. We saved you from the drowning that you almost endured. You almost died. And that's kind of what Bernie Sanders is and government is in general. They create all of these problems, whether they know it or not. I think they should know it because, of course, government has never worked. How could you not know that if you were part of government for 30 plus years like Bernie Sanders? You turn around, you hand a few things out, making people feel good about themselves. If you saved them, got them off out of poverty and starvation, and next thing you know, you're the hero. So maybe you shouldn't have put people in those situations to begin with by not advocating for an ever-expansive welfare state and big, bloated bureaucracy. But nevertheless, I wanted to mention how I noticed that the underbelly of the Democratic Party and leftists is becoming more and more and more centralized power, state control, top-down approach to everything, much like any democracy ends up heading towards. When you talk about popularity, which all democracy is a popularity contest by virtue of promising free things or ever expansive programs, you ultimately lead to the demise of that democracy. So we're on the clear trajectory. Nothing here should be shocking. The country's becoming more government and state-sponsored control, and there's more centralization, and there's more people like Bernie Sanders popping up. And of course, the public is drinking this Kool-Aid feverishly, but in particular, the Democratic side of the aisle. So why I wanted to mention Bernie Sanders is because in addition to everyone popularizing his beliefs more and more and more by promoting him on social media and sharing his ideas with their friends, and, what comes out of that, what's born out of that is more politicians in the mold of Bernie Sanders, like AOC and the four horsewomen there in the Congressional Beltway District in D.C. now, just kind of stinking up the place, causing a ruckus and generating all this tension with their terrible, shitty ideas. We now have a poll, pretty much all of the polls, whether the Quinnipiac, the U.S. News, whoever's aggregating all of this data for these polls for who the front runner is in the Democratic nominee, the polls have put forth Bernie Sanders as currently in the month of January 2020, late January, that is, Bernie Sanders is number one overall polling for the Democrats. So, if time stopped today and the presidential race were to occur today, Donald J. Trump, Commander-in-Chief, number 45, would be literally looking across the debate stage to Bernie Sanders at a spry age of somewhere around 77, 78 years old. So you'd have two old white men. I've talked about that before. But the sick, twisted part about all of this is that this is not bullshit. I think the polls are, have a genuine sense of what's going on in the minds of Democratic voters. And I think they're taking a pretty good subset and cut here when they aggregate what's going on. And this is just more of what I said. I mean, people love the idea of government protecting them and serving them and handing them free goodies. They have the idea of America, liberty, and free markets in the reverse. Again, government is there to protect and secure our liberties to do what we want to do, unencumbered from regulations, violations, taxations, and aggression or coercion on behalf of the federal government. Clearly lined in the Constitution is the ability for people to chase their dreams pursuant that they do not hurt anyone, cause fraud, murder, steal, any of those things, commit treason against the country. And of course, Bernie Sanders takes an oath of office I don't want to say year in and year out, but term in and term out, swearing to uphold the Constitution. So, of course, 99% of these people who get elected to Congress, whether it be the House of Representatives or Senate, they are indeed breaking their oath of office. Now, if a doctor was breaking his oath of medicine or an attorney was, breaking his oath of jurisprudence, while, by all means, they would probably be going to jail in some capacity, or let alone disbarred or their licensures revoked. So we're talking about how democracy is so important and how these elected officials are so important that they dictate, maneuver, and manipulate the public and put in place the public's, in air quotes, desires into policy. But then when they break the Constitution, they get away scot-free. Nobody cares. Nobody seems to understand that. It doesn't make any sense. And Bernie Sanders is the epitome. He is the ever embodiment of doing everything you are not supposed to do when you are a senator in the United States. We are not a communistic, socialistic, Marxist regime. We are predicated on free markets, private property, and the opportunity for the federal government to instill with us a court system and a national defense. Outside of that, states' rights was incredibly important because it allowed for this inherent competition of societal building, of who is doing things the right way, allowing peoples to move across state lines to enjoy a different type of lifestyle. Instead, we have the Bernie Sanders of the world with his lowest common denominator totalitarian move of saying, we are going to say for everyone, by everyone, we will give everyone everything they possibly could need to succeed and not be in poverty and have their health services taken care of and having their education taken care of. And oh, by the way, maybe there's some daycare that can be implemented. All of these things are coming out of Bernie Sanders' mouth. He's been doing this stuff for over 35 years, 45 years, something to that effect. He's been going on and on and on and on, promising how he will do something different if he is president of the United States to, by all means, change the trajectory of the outcomes of the people in the United States to a tune that they don't have to worry about anything. Essentially, their entire lives are free, and the idea that they're working is merely because they want some extra pocket change to spend at the liquor store or go on vacation. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, only to be topped by Andrew Yang in the UBI thing, and I said I would talk about automation, and I'll get to that in a little bit later segment in this podcast. But I just wanted to point out how creepy and eerie it is that some cuckoo person like Bernie Sanders can gain all of this attention and all these accolades and be hailed as an unsung hero to especially the young people who are struggling, the millennials, the people who listen to this podcast. It's easy for Bernie Sanders to say there's not a lot of jobs for young people. It's easy for him to say that there's crippling amounts of student loan debt. It's easy for him to say there's not a lot of opportunity when you graduate college and you're a young person. It's easy for him to say that people are putting off marriage because they're too indebted. It's easy for him to say that people cannot buy a house because they're too indebted and it takes much more time for them to save because of them going to college, not being able to find a job and maybe have to wiggle around and do something different. It's easy for him to identify all of these problems. It's easy for him to say that the bosses and the billionaires and the multimillionaires are the ones rolling around in the dough, living a lavish lifestyle, while the rest of the country is left out to dry. And by all means, this is an awful, terrible situation. It's easy to point all of these things out to impressionable young people who have no life experience and don't understand how lucky they have it and how fortunate they are to live in the United States. The United States that out of maybe 33 or 34 developed countries is the only one that does not have single-payer healthcare. And I think that's incredible because we do not need single-payer healthcare. We need to go to the direction of free markets, something I can explain in another episode. But it's very, very easy when you're up top to seem sentimental and caring and that you care about everyone and use the words for all and use the words fight for 15 or fight for a living wage. It's easy to promise all of these free things. It is very, very easy. It does not take courage. It does not take intellectual stamina to sit there and bark out how people need this, that, and the other thing from the federal government. They do not. And to the extent that there's a figment of an imagination out there that Bernie Sanders has that we can actually finance all of this is a complete and utter fucking joke. We don't need a Green New Deal. We do not need any of these things that he's advocating for. It's pure, unadulterated socialism that will lead to the continued demise of our country. A currency that is weak, debt that is out of control, deficits that are ballooning, things that are not productive. We built this country on markets. We built a country for the first 100 plus years who did not have income taxes, where regulations were minimal, where very, very good things were going on, where there was privacy and where there was protection for that of the entrepreneur and respect for people who were the doers, the inventors, the people who wanted to come here and blaze a trail, who understood why the founding fathers devised the government in which a way they did. It was very important. It was paramount to the essence of being an American. Why? You could just sit there and do nothing and realize this is bad for you, it's unproductive, and you could be helpless and homeless and destitute, or you could participate in the economy by working, earning a living, starting a business, earning a wage from another employer, and carving out an incredible life. Because ultimately, these capitalistic societies are based on one thing: productivity. The more productive in a society is, the better off the people at the bottom are, and the more leisure time that can be enjoyed by everybody. Unfortunately, the system we have right now is the left dragging us further and further into a quote-unquote mixed market economy where essentially the government intrinsically grows and grows and grows, and while doing so, eliminates the idea that we have unfettered capitalisms or markets at all. This parasitic nature of the federal government has absolutely destroyed markets, created crony capitalists, created an income inequality disparity never seen before, and yet the United States is marveled as this world-class capitalistic society. While it is great that we have capitalism to a certain extent, and it is very, very, very important, it is not nearly what we need or what we had and what made us great. What we are gunning for as a nation by getting sucked up into socialism and Bernie Sanders' charade and his bullshit, especially because this guy's never actually worked a goddamn day in his life, for someone who's lived off the teat of the government and became a self-made millionaire, in air quotes, who owns 3 houses, who vilifies the people that he actually is, but he didn't earn this stuff honestly. And notice now he says billionaires more than he says millionaires for that reason. But anyway, to say that our country is getting dragged that farther to the left, what we are doing to ourselves is unraveling an onion, and this onion is going to die. It's going to be stale. It is absolutely awful, the situation that voters are putting our country in. It is absolutely predictable from a libertarian free market perspective. Because with democracy, the masses vote. The masses are stupid. They don't do their research. They don't know just how evil and pernicious socialism is, what it has done to the rest of the world, what ruthless dictators have done with top-down control, the poverty that's been caused, the medical services that have deceased, all of these things that have happened. Why the fuck do we need to sit here and accept that? We shouldn't. And the way to not accept it is by voluntary interaction, creating our own businesses, generating our own revenue, starting our own side hustles, and advocating till we're blue in the face for capitalism and free markets. Because that is what the country is founded on, and that is the most moral, and that is the beacon of hope for us as a citizenry, specifically millennials. We should not tolerate the follies of the AOCs or Bernie Sanders. It is awful. It's downright terrible. While he is honest, he is honestly wrong and has been his entire life and career. It is embarrassing. It is a detriment to the minds of young people. It's not cool to be lazy. It's not cool to advocate for more government. It's not heartwarming to advocate for Medicare for all because it's totally impractical, stupid, and will result in worse health outcomes. We know this because these countries who have quote-unquote socialized medicine, oftentimes they come here for treatment. Or oftentimes there's a backlog for services. Maybe the hip replacement they need takes 6 months in a waiting line versus that of 6 weeks here in the US. There are actual outcomes to all of these things. These socialistic countries do not like Bernie Sanders pointing to them saying how socialist they are. They realize some aspects of their economy are socialist, but they're more predominantly capitalist than that of us. And the reason they have some of these social services is because they had capitalism big time. And now they're whittling away at that golden goose. That stack of money that capitalism and the wealth that it built up in that country is being whittled away and destroyed by politicians and taxpayers and voters who vote these politicians into office. Eventually, that golden goose will not lay any more eggs. And you have to start over from scratch, which is capitalism. The question is not, what do we need to do to get out of poverty? The question is, what did we do to get from poverty to prosperity? If that makes sense. Prosperity is caused by markets. Poverty is caused by government intervention in every single economic avenue. That's the way it is. So it's disgusting to see someone like Bernie Sanders running away with the polls. And this is what it was like, the sentiment in 2016. I mean, I think he had more popularity back then than maybe he even does now, because Hillary was that, hated amongst the base there. But let's just say he does have more popularity than he did 4 years ago, because certainly socialism does. Maybe not him per se, but the brand of socialism has never been felt stronger in this country since maybe the Cold War era, or back when people were card-carrying communists, when that was really kind of acceptable in the United States, because there was that moment when people came over and were those things, and they got to participate in the democratic process. But let's just think about this for a second. What are we doing as a nation when young people think this is okay? It's really not. I mean, Joe Biden is number 2. I think the regime and establishment of the Democratic Party are going to try to propel him to be number 1. I mean, they'd much rather see Elizabeth Warren than Bernie Sanders. And I thought all along that she was the darling of the Democratic side of the aisle, or the Democratic nomination process, that is. But who knows? I mean, I think people are starting to see through her whiny, bitchy mentality and her entire I'm a Native American thing. I don't really know where that stands. I mean, I think it's still a 3-horse race between the 3 of them. I don't think Mayor Pete stands a chance, but we shall see. Who really knows? And of course, Bloomberg's not going to buy his way in, but what he did say, and I mentioned this in my last podcast, that he's going to donate $1 billion to the candidate who gets the nomination to ultimately take down Donald Trump. So there's a lot of money being thrown around by capitalists who are really trying to do a disservice to themselves, I suppose, because they know in a free market, there's more wealth to be had in the United States at that point. They can stay captive to the United States instead of going elsewhere. So they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot. But what they're doing right is they're acknowledging the fact that socialism and bigger government does benefit a few people at the top, and maybe they're in cahoots with some of these people at the top. So maybe, who knows what Bloomberg's plan is? I mean, he's kind of hard to read, but ultimately, again, I just got to beg the question of what are we doing as a nation when all these young people vote for Bernie Sanders and want to see him in office? I mean, we're marching off the cliff because of stuff like this. And I'm not a doomsday guy, because every single day, the quality of life we experience gets better and better and better because of capitalism. But this countervailing force of socialism and this blue tide taking over the nation is really, really alarming. It turns out there's just a lot more deplorables out there than people realize, and I think Trump still is going to have it in the bag in 2020, and hopefully that's what occurs. But it's all contingent on what occurs in this economy. Nothing more than that. Unless the Wuhan virus, the coronavirus, knocks us all out, I think everything is contingent on the economy, and that's what's going to dictate if Trump stays in the Oval Office or not. And he always dodges bullets. People don't give him enough credit. Every hot water he ever gets in, he gets completely out scot-free. Even if it's boiling up to his eyeballs, he somehow manages to emerge unscathed. It's pretty funny. I got to hand it to the guy. He's hilarious. But nevertheless, I just wanted to shed some light on the whole Bernie thing. I think it's pretty interesting as a nation and society how we're headed that way. It's just so fucked up. I mean, just someone right here who loves personal liberty, loves personal responsibility, loves earning more money, loves doing whatever the hell I want to do. And I look around, all these lemmings want to have uniform medicine and uniform education and uniform, I don't know, everything, just destruction of civil liberties. I mean, they are just completely out of their mind. To not look back and realize government has never worked out for us, and that the minimum amount of government has actually been the ideal amount of government over the course of our history as a nation. I mean, you think those two simple things should just be like pretty self-evident, and people could just realize maybe we should kind of at least attempt to follow this Constitution thing. Maybe there's a reason why we were the envy of the world for so long and still are somehow, mostly by our reputation, despite being tarnished in years, recently. But that finally brings me to my last point. I want to spend the last couple of minutes here talking about automation. So automation, when I speak about that, I'm speaking mostly about artificial intelligence or robotics that can supplant and completely replace the human aspect of labor. So the reason I want to mention this is because Andrew Yang and the Bernie Sanders of the world, they speak quite a bit about automation and how it's going to displace a lot of workers. It's going to leave a lot of workers out high and dry without opportunity, who are not trained to do something new, and it's hard for them to pick up new skills. So we need to create this broad-based training program, federally backed, to get people into jobs that make more sense or that cannot be automated. And there's always these threats, and it's always been this way for the past few hundred years, ever since inventions really started taking off, that people would always be fearful of what would happen with their jobs be displaced or eliminated. And this is the fear-mongering tactic of people like Andrew Yang. He's hinging his whole campaign on people who are pissed off, who lost their manufacturing jobs in the Midwest and the Rust Belt and all of these things. And, I happen to live in Ohio, and I understand that sentiment. And while people are pissed off about that, this has been happening slowly. Seldom does an earth-shattering invention come out there that displaces an entire industry. But what these UBI types and these redistribution types are arguing is that this artificial intelligence and these robotics are going to quickly capsize the entire economy from top to bottom, not just a few aspects, not just manufacturing per se, that this will be so earth-shattering that nobody will be able to work and everyone will be out of jobs and everybody will be in poverty. And of course, this doesn't make any sense because any time there has ever been a change or a vicious bomb thrown into the economy by virtue of an invention that was indeed incredible and groundbreaking, it's only been a net benefit. I mean, Tom Woods has said this before. I mean, if someone came along and said, here's a matter transporter that can just transport matter from one spot to another, do you think we would be that devastated that we don't need tractor trailers anymore? I doubt it. It essentially frees people up to do something else more productive or provide some other type of service. In addition to the fact that falling prices and deflation is the key to a lot of these modern invention marvels. Anytime you have some of these more productive, highly capital-intensive robotics, well, of course, again, you're freeing people up. But at the same time, these robotics are so much more productive than that of the human. They're spitting out all these widgets and all these services much, much, much quicker. And when they're doing that, that's putting massive downward pushes on the price of these goods and services. So maybe the laptop that the average worker needed to save up for was $1,000 because, of course, these prices have come down naturally anyway because of the free market. Maybe it's $10. I mean, for crying out loud, what the world needs is deflation of prices and more inventions that make the human experience easier. Maybe all of the people out there who cannot afford to fly planes or fly in a plane for their vacation travel, maybe because some of these robotic inventions, maybe all of a sudden people can afford these flying in planes much easier. Who really knows? There's so many different ways this can go. And there's arguments over and over and over again about, well, what are we going to do when all these workers are displaced? Well, we always do something different. Right now we have massive structural unemployment. For crying out loud. I mean, there's millions of jobs that go unfilled every single day in the United States that desperately need to be filled. In fact, in healthy economies, you could venture to say that there's almost more help in terms of labor needed than that of bodies around. It's a magnet effect. A lot of these countries and cities that are doing the right thing with low taxes and low regulatory burdens, they're sucking at people in droves, and these people continue to found new businesses, many of which in the leisure sector, which would happen. But what's wrong with creating businesses in the leisure sector or in the fun sector because the robots are doing all the manufacturing and heavy lifting? I mean, no one's going to bitch when a huge life, earth-shattering, changing, wonderful invention comes out that improves the lives of everyone. It makes something more convenient. We always find a way to live more extravagantly or divert the people into other careers. You don't need to stronghold the job training workforce from the federal government's top-down approach. You don't need to hand people a few $1,000s, I guess $12,000 a year, like Andrew Yang's pretending and asking people to, really cheer him on for because that's what they want to see. You don't need any of these things. You don't need the additional money. You don't need the job training. You don't need any of this stuff. I mean, people who are freed up can be more entrepreneurial. There'll be other businesses that expand. In fact, what it does is it cleanses the economy of people who are doing stuff that's unproductive. It makes them focus even more on stuff that's productive. Namely, is going to college a good idea? No. If there's even less jobs out there because of artificial intelligence, people will not go to college. Then on the flip side of the thing, all this technology, if it's that popular and it's going to flourish that much and we need that many robots and that much artificial intelligence, well, by all means, we probably need millions of people to build these factories and to do some of these tasks to get these facilities up and running that build these robots. It can't be robots just building robots from the jump. So there's many avenues for exploration of the economy and different ways to innovate and create. And I don't want to sound like a hedonist, but yeah, life will get better. And the average poor person's life will get better as a result of AI and robots. And I can confidently say that because just look at the past. Present day, 2020, we have the opportunity to take a job anywhere for almost any income if we have the right skills and training. It's incumbent on us to do so. It's not incumbent on the government to force us to be trained and socially engineer us for something. And then 5 years later, that job gets displaced as well. We start all over again and we exhaust taxpayer funds to do the same thing. It doesn't make any sense. We have a wonderful economy, the boom-bust cycle, which of course is put into place oftentimes by the Federal Reserve, but the creative destruction aspect of our economy is something that's natural, needs to happen. And we're always better off as a society. What does not make us better off is the Bernie Sanders of the world, who are trying to encroach on the innovations that will free people up. The innovations like robotics, the innovations like nuclear power. All of these things that leftists and socialists are so scared of are the things that ultimately are going to lift us to new heights that we've never seen before and allow us to enjoy life to the best of our ability, to really know what it's like to live as a human, not worrying about going paycheck to paycheck. There's never been a time where inventions have radically eliminated industries insofar that people were literally starving for years and years and years. It's never happened, ever. It's always the opposite effect. Other jobs are spontaneously created out of this, and life goes on, and prices go down, and the abundance is ever greater. So do not let the scare tactics of the Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yangs hold you back. I feel a little preachy talking about this, but it's the way of the world. Until something drastic happens, we don't need to worry about it. There's so many people planning for doomsday, and it never comes. The only true doomsday is the government keeps getting bigger, and eventually it will implode. There will be a problem. There will be a dollar crisis, and we got to clean up the act. And there's no better people to clean up than the act than the people who are entrepreneurial, who are free market oriented, who understand markets, and can help pull us out of this rut. We need educated millennials who understand that markets work, entrepreneurism is good, capitalism is supreme to socialism, and that we could all stand to do better by pitching in and instructing our fellow mans and telling them, hey, don't take Bernie Sanders seriously. Take the market guys seriously. Take the entrepreneurs seriously. Do what you can to be a productive member of society and speak out against government intervention in everything, from wars to welfare to anything Bernie Sanders want to get his creepy mitts on. And that's all I got. I'll see you guys on episode number 26. Thank you very much.